to the Life in the Cave podcast, where we work through the nonsense and the lies, noble and otherwise, that you are seeing in your news, in your culture, at your dinner table, wherever else you're seeing nonsense and lies. We're going to work through them. I'm Matt.
And I'm Micah.
And we are ready to talk about a lot of stuff that happened this week. We have plenty of COVID stuff to talk about. We've got plenty of Trump stuff, election stuff. It's basically the same stuff every week in a different way until this election comes, and then hopefully we'll have some other things to talk about. But it is what it is here, and we are going to begin. I always want to start with a little bit of philosophy. We like to smatter it in as we're able to, but I want to start with this concept that I actually heard today from Mitch McConnell. Yes, that's right, the great philosopher. Wow. Mitch McConnell. I was watching the don't ask me why I was watching this actually, but I was watching the vote for the Supreme Court Justice, potentially or almost certainly at this point, Amy Coney Barrett, and it's almost guaranteed that she's going to get in. But Mitch McConnell was talking to, they have a bunch of addresses before they actually vote, and he was talking to whoever was listening after Chuck Schumer was talking, and he said this, and I wrote it down because I think it's significant. He wrote, "There's nothing innate in legal training that equips one to become a moral philosopher." And he used the word philosopher, so I thought it was interesting. But he touched on a subject that's actually very, very interesting. It's very contentious as well. This idea that you can teach goodness, you can teach morality, and that once someone knows how to be moral, they will be moral. And as you may have guessed, I appreciate this because it harkens back to Plato and the Gorgias, where the question put to Gorgias is, if you have a student, do you have to teach him to be good before you can teach him rhetoric? Or does he already have to be good and then you teach him rhetoric? And then Gorgias basically says, yes, I can teach him to be good. And that's where he gets in trouble. So this idea of teaching goodness and this idea that you might know how to be a good lawyer, you might know how to be a good politician, you might know how to be a good doctor, and it doesn't make you good. And I don't know what Mitch McConnell was really getting at there, to be completely honest, because I didn't hear the context of the quote. But I think it's really it's an important question: is how do we learn morality? How do we teach morality? And how does that pertain to a job? How does it pertain to your police officers? Right? We have a big problem with police officers and whether they're racist or whether they're corrupt. We have a big problem with politicians, and so there seems to be this disparity between being good and being a good, whatever you are, being a good cop. So I wanted to maybe, if we could just discuss that for a little bit, or I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. That was something I've been thinking of since I heard it.
Well, the philosopher that you're speaking of, Mitch McConnell, of course, not Plato. It's so funny. He's kind of been through a rough time in the Trump presidency, right? Because he has done things that have angered people. I think people thought he was he was a politician of the ilk of maybe a John McCain, possibly someone who was kind of revered by and large by Democrats, even though they didn't agree with many of his policies, and they kind of expected McConnell or Lindsey Graham to kind of go over to their side, just like Susan Collins has done in Maine. In fact, while you were doing your intro, I think it became official that Barrett she's officially confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. Just while you did your monologue.
Is that from the Judiciary Committee or from the whole Senate?
I think the Senate just.
Okay, so she's in.
Yep, it's 52-48. That's the final tally. And Susan Collins, she's a Republican senator from Maine, and she's the only GOP senator who voted no. So she switched over. So she is kind of in the middle there. She's not really a GOP senator. She's on the GOP, but kind of only in Maine would that count as a GOP senator.
Sure.
But I think people thought that McConnell would kind of be something like that, who would be sort of sensitive to the Democrats' side. and he's not done anything that makes the Democratic Party very happy. So he's kind of a maligned character now, and it's interesting that he's in any way at all is standing firm on things, and whether or not you agree with him, that he's holding the line or being a party man, or even talking about principles. And this principle is really interesting. You talked about police officers, but what do you think about plumbers, tradespeople? I mean, is there a way for even people of these jobs to be good and moral? And what does a moral plumber look like versus an immoral plumber?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's sort of the point that I think Plato was making. Now, in the context of what he was saying, it's important to realize that that goodness was the topic in question for Plato. So a good plumber, a good cop, a good rhetorician, whatever, was certainly secondary. And I think his argument would be that you do have to somehow master this idea of goodness before you can do anything else. So I think a good person, a good man, would be foundational to a good anything else. You kind of have to work on that in its own realm before you can transition it into another occupation or another setting. That's not to say you can't be an effective brain surgeon or whatever. You can't be an effective plumber. You can't fix pipes really well and be a terrible person, because we know that's very, very possible and probably likely for a lot of positions of politics, particularly. But there is something innate about being good that has to be, that I guess it just has to be taken in its own realm. I don't know. I think that was the question that Plato was trying to get at, is defining these virtues and then figuring out how do we get them. And I don't think he ever came up with an answer.
Well, he was really good at that part, but forcing us to ask some hard questions. But I'm thinking about, these are the virtues, and there are so many varieties of virtues. There are physical virtues. Someone who's particularly fast, they possess the virtue of speed, and that is, by all accounts, a really good virtue to have. But then there's moral virtues, and those probably are a little bit better to have than pure physical virtue. So we can think of someone who's a really talented and gifted athlete, but if they behave in a really poor way, we don't tend to like them particularly well, because they're failing on a moral test, though physically they have all of the virtues and the gifts that one could expect from them. So I think in terms of plumber, you can be a good plumber that is technically proficient at your job, but if you steal or do things in a way that makes you seem like you're very good, but 10 years down the road, the work that you do is going to fall through, but at the time it looks good on the outside, you may not be considered to be a particularly good plumber. But if you're talking about moral goodness, then a good plumber might be slow. Technically, they can get the job done, but not quickly, and may not make it look as good, but they're not going to rob you in the process. I don't know. It's the feeling.
Yeah. I think there's certainly consequences, right? Is particularly in the trades. If you're good at something, then that's only part of the picture, because you also have to work with other people. You have to be, as one of the words Plato would use would be just. You have to be just, and defining that might be another challenge. But I think the whole idea that going back to the quote, that there's nothing innate in legal training that equips one to become a moral philosopher is, I think no one's ever going to really listen to this again. That is to say that this quote, it's a passing quote, but I think that it's super important to realize that as we look at politicians, as we look at the people that are in charge of our lives, whether it's our bosses at work, or whether it's the people that we have to work with, whether it's the people that we see every day, like there's nothing innate in those positions relative to us or relative to the rest of society that makes those people have to care about goodness. There's nothing that makes them. And so that's why when you find someone who is good, it doesn't really matter where they're from, or it doesn't matter what they're doing. There's a really good store clerk. Like I like the guy that runs the gas station down the road. He runs a gas station, but he's a nice guy. He's good to me. He does good things, I think. Now, in the grand scheme of things, is he a good person? That's going to take more than me to figure out. But all in all, your position in society has no relative, is not relative to your position as a good human being.
It's interesting that this comes up in modern politics, because I think of modern politics as being in essence, who is better coached for the position that they have. So if you think of it, looking at our two candidates who just had a debate last week, the president is not particularly well coached, but his opponent, the former vice president, is well coached. And this is really all the more that there is to politics, someone who is really prepared for the spotlight and for the stage. And what was so interesting about the last election back in 2016 was that it was obvious that Hillary Clinton was way better coached and way better prepared to do things like debate and give speeches. And yet, in the end, those things didn't prove to be what other people were interested in their candidate. That was not what the states chose. And so I think it's interesting when you talk about politics and about goodness and what is particularly virtuous or what is a particular good. I would not say that Trump is a very good politician, and yet there's some amount of effectiveness to what he does based on kind of changing the rules of the game midstream, as it were.
Right. Yeah, he might not be a good person either.
Right, exactly.
But he
some evidence that he's not.
Right. Yeah. So there's some element of there being you can be effective and not be good. Yeah. Really interesting.
Really short side story to that is, of the founders, a lot of people would have said that from a moral perspective, John Adams was, one of the better ones. John Adams did not have any slaves. Was a faithful and by all accounts a loving husband, a little hard as a father, but a good father. Didn't have kids run away rampant. Whereas some of the other founding fathers who became presidents, George Washington wasn't really in that picture as much. He was a general of the army, and involved obviously, but had some particular moral failings in his life. Thomas Jefferson as well, and yet both. At the time that your Whigs and your Democratic Republicans would say that Adams was the least effective president of those first three, that Jefferson and Washington had more effective and more beloved presidents, where Adams, as a one-term president, obviously just didn't garner a lot of respect and was kind of the author of a lot of controversy, even though morally speaking he was probably more outstanding than the presidents that preceded and succeeded him.
Yeah, that's interesting. That actually harkens back to a class that I remember taking on the Kings and Chronicles in the Bible. And there's this interesting situation where the good kings have kind of bad sons. And there's no real way to say whether the bad kings will have bad sons or good sons, and that just goes to show that you can be a good leader, you can be a good person, and those two things might not correlate. You can be an effective person at leading a country, and you're a terrible person at leading a family, and then when you fail in that regard, then your predecessor, kings usually have their sons are going to be their predecessors. They're the ones who end up being bad because you spent all the time on ruling this state and you spent no time on ruling your own zone. So yeah, real interesting, real good consideration. And I think that's one of those things that parents, fathers and mothers have a lot of consideration in. You can be a great businessman. You have all these tropes about when you're watching a movie or a TV show, where it's this guy who's a CEO, or he's this business tycoon, and his family's falling apart, and that's like the foundation for almost every Hallmark movie.
Yeah, that's Hallmark 101 right there.
Yeah. So okay. So moving on. I just from the Amy Coney Barrett nomination, I did want to point out that if you were watching the town hall from our boy Joe Biden, which I did watch it, so I get the credit there. He said that after the nomination, he would tell people what he's all about with this packing the court thing. So I just want to point that out, that since she's been nominated, someone's got to hold his feet to the fire. Someone's going to say, Joe, it's time to tell us what's going on with this court packing. He won't.
Yeah, any minute now, I expect to hear it, really.
Yeah, he won't, and no one's going to tell him to do it. So, but I just want to say that that's true, that that's actually happening. He did say that, and that's where we are. So, beyond that, it's been a long week. It is Monday, and there are plenty of things that are happening, that have happened, and the most, what's the opposite of recent? The most far removed from the last podcast is actually the debate. So we should talk a little bit about this recent debate. Were you able to catch the debate in one form or another?
Yeah, I got to listen to the vast majority of it. So yeah, I didn't get to watch until the next day, but I got to listen to it live.
Okay, yeah. So I did also listen to the debate. So I didn't see it, but I did listen to it. And there were just a couple little things that I wanted to point out from that debate. And let me find here it is. So the first thing that's significant from watching this, let me hold on here. There we go. The first thing from the debate is the talk about COVID. And now I don't necessarily want to transition into COVID right now, but I do want to talk about the disparity between both these candidates and what they believe in COVID. So at this point here, Donald Trump is talking about COVID, and I'll start the clip.
Great hospitals, and now I recovered. 99.9 of young people recover.
Can you hear that clip?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
99% of people recover. We have to recover. We can't close up our nation. We have to open our school, and we can't close up our nation, or you're not going to have a nation.
And of course, the CDC has said young people can get sick with COVID-19 and can pass it. Vice President Biden, I want to talk broadly about strategy, though.
Well, so that was just the end of Trump's talk about COVID. But I think there's something really important contrasted with Biden, with what Biden said, which is actually in this clip here, which I will play now.
President Biden, your reaction, and just 40% of Americans say they would definitely agree to take a coronavirus vaccine if it was approved by the government. What steps would you take to give Americans confidence in a vaccine if it were approved?
Make sure it's totally transparent. Have the scientists of the world see it, know it, look at it, go through all the processes. And by the way, this is the same fellow who told you this is going to end by Easter last time. This is the same fellow who told you that, don't worry, we're going to end this by the summer. We're about to go into a dark winter. And he has no clear plan, and there's no prospect that there's going to be a vaccine available for the majority of the American people before the middle of next year.
President Trump.
So there's definitely two different messages coming through when we look at what Donald Trump said and what Biden said. And Trump is obviously trying to play down the significance of COVID, and Biden is certainly trying to play up. I think one of the important political plays here going on is that Biden wants to make Trump the person responsible for COVID, and so which one do you think is more effective? Which one do you think is going to work?
Well, it depends on what you want out of the world at this moment in time, I think. If you are a person who yourself is particularly afraid of the coronavirus, or you know someone who has been afflicted by it or possibly even been very sick or died from it, or if you yourself have become sick with it, I think you're going to want to say this is a really bad thing and we really, really need something different because it's been around for 6 months now, 7 months, and nothing has really changed and doesn't seem like there's any more of a handle on fixing it. But if you are a type of person who thinks, statistically speaking, that's not a really particularly high number, and I've encountered sicknesses at least this bad in my life, if not worse, and I happen to know some people who got sick with it and they had no symptoms at all, and actually I'm out of work, or I'm underemployed at the moment in time. If you have that perspective, then you're going to really like Trump's side. But it's really interesting that they've turned what is essentially a natural phenomenon with almost no ability to stop or change. It is a virus after all. It is not a person, or people moving through an area that can just, build a wall to stop them from coming through. But that is what's being emphasized, is how one can stop it. Really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if more people are wanting to be locked down. Like, do more people want to be locked down, or do more people want to be?
Yeah, as far as numbers of people, I don't know, but I do know people in my life who really think that locking down is just best. Like, they really want more of it. They really want everything to stop for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. The numbers change, it seems to be a little bit, at least until a vaccine is produced. They really want everything just to come to a screeching halt and stop this thing. But that's just, all respect to everyone involved. This is not how viruses ever are stopped, and it's a virus. It's just not. That's just not going to work. But I do know people who actually hold that view.
Yeah, I know people on both sides of this thing. Like, I know people who are still locked up, like from the very initial, from February, like people are still in their houses, and I know people that are just completely over it. So I can see the sort of person that would be like, listen, I don't want to get locked down again. I'm going to vote for Trump. And then I could also see the sort of person that says, I don't want to die of COVID. I'm going to vote for Biden. Like, both of those are definite subcategories, definite categories of the voting block. And I wonder which one's bigger. I don't know.
Yeah. So something that's interesting too, I know in this, and you might have a clip for it, I'm not sure, but the interesting thing is, so Biden is definitely really trying to say, hold Trump responsible for the deaths. Even if you look at any of the campaign ads, a lot of them are trying to say that, essentially Trump has 220,000 people's blood on his hands because he should have done something in particular. But if you saw in that debate, what Biden's plan was, I think he's asked very explicitly what his plan would be, and he actually just says all things that Trump is already doing. And it's really interesting when you think about it. And interesting has got to be the word that's banned for at least for me for the rest of the night, because interesting is not a good word. But I think it's interesting that there is essentially no different way to approach this. Biden or Trump, what power as president of a country, what power do they have? Trump has already commandeered various companies to produce ventilators, which we didn't need, as it turned out. They weren't really working effectively, especially in the beginning. They didn't know how to use them the right way. Right. They thought they needed so many of them, and that was going to be the solution. As it turns out, laying people prone was more effective. So the strategy to defeat this isn't something that really lies in the president's hands. And Biden's plan and Trump's plan look essentially identical. All the things that Biden suggested that he would do are things that Trump has already done or is currently in the process of doing. And there's really no difference. I wonder what Americans think is going to be the solution that a president can provide. Is it really just someone who says to all state governors, shut down, totally close down your economies, we're going to ride this thing out? Or someone who says, like from the Trump perspective, he should tell all governors to open everything up and should put a federal mandate in that no states can be closed down. Like, what is it that people think the president is actually going to do to stop or protect you from this virus? I'd be really curious to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking about something in regards to that, but I want to say real quick, welcome back, Neo Epicurean. Thanks for coming back after last week. If anyone's in the room, please hit like, please hit share. It would be nice to get the room full again and get some people talking. That'd be fantastic. I was thinking a lot about the libertarians, and I know that you're kind of in that zone. I know you keep your finger to the pulse of the libertarian movement. And what do they think of Trump? Because from my perspective, most politicians would have used COVID-19 as a fantastic opportunity to centralize power, right? Like, what better opportunity? Like, what if Barack Obama was the president right now? How many executive orders would be out? How many times would the impetus of action be on the federal government rather than the individual states? And Trump's really let it ride. He's let the crazies be crazy. He's let California do their thing, and he's let every state do their thing. There's been no federal mandates. What do they think about that?
Yeah, so this kind of gets back to a little bit of what you were talking about at the very beginning about politically speaking, what is good and so on. Like, you're right, Obama would have done that. He would have been he was very politically savvy. So he would have said, this is an opportunity for us to get some stuff done that kind of are in line with, the cause of which, I'm here as the figurehead representing. And Trump seems to see himself as a, what did McCain call himself? He called himself like something like an outsider, or what did he call himself? He kind of gave himself a moniker of I'm a wrangler, or I forget what it was, something Western. We'll have to look it up and see what it was.
Okay.
He kind of figured himself as someone who was on the outside. He didn't really follow the party line. He kind of, was justice from the outside, a sheriff coming into a lawless town and kind of ran his own rules. I think Trump actually really sees himself in that way. So the libertarian wing of the Republican Party, or the Libertarian Party in general, they've been fairly supportive of Trump. I think they find him a little bit weak because Trump has held on to some of these mainstream things, he sort of badmouthed Fauci a little bit, but by and large, he's still kind of holding a lot of those views and saying, look, the virus is really bad and we're doing a lot of things, doing a lot of testing, but we have to really open up. We really need to open up. A libertarian would obviously say, listen, there's no reason why government should shut down anything over this. It should be totally up to private businesses entirely. And so they're saying, he's doing the right thing by, at least arguing for the side of reopening the economy, and by not jumping in places, like you said, where it's not in his jurisdiction to do, even though other presidents would do that. So they're giving him props for that. But I think they're saying, really, he could be way stronger on all of these issues, and especially as it regards to states' rights, and really saying, listen, you really need to let states just decide to do what they're going to do in every way. I think a lot of them wished he would not support states like California and New York, who are asking for all this money because of closing down their economies and all the support they need to keep their states running, that they really think, these states aren't doing anything you would want them to do anyway. They're failing. Don't bail them out. And the fact that he grants all of their emergency requests really is starting to make some libertarians upset.
Right. Yeah. By the way, can you see the chat?
I cannot. I can see that's going on, but I can't read it. It's very small.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we'll have to find a way to get you to see the chat. But I think one of the points that Neo Epicurean made was is pretty good. Like, they're trying to hold Trump responsible for everyone that died in this thing, and you can't do it. There's just no way to, a president in general is just not. There's just not enough power. You'd have to be God to stop it.
Yeah, I think the thought is that if he would have done something earlier, and I think there's some things that we're talking about. This came up in the debate too. He says, I closed the border immediately to China when there were 5 cases in the U.S., and you told me that I was xenophobe for doing that. Like, what would you have proposed that I would have done to stop this earlier on? And it is a good point. How does one actually stop a virus? What would have been done sooner? New Zealand, you've seen the numbers in New Zealand now too, right? in Australia.
Right.
Some of these places who got it way later because they closed everything down, and there was a lot of praise and rah-rah about how we defeated this virus. And see what's going on in China now too. China is just looking perfectly normal. I mean, from the outside, we don't know what's really going on, but everything they're presenting to us from the outside looks like everyone's hanging out in real close proximity, no masks at all. And New Zealand locked everything down, and what happened? Some shipment of something came in, frozen vegetables from some other place got imported into New Zealand, and they think there was some contamination there, and now it's starting to spread there. So yeah, there's no way that a president has any power to stop a virus. Doesn't pass the logic test, the sniff test either. So I don't know what anyone is expecting out of him, but holding him personally responsible, I think, is really interesting, because how these numbers have been counted. People who die from COVID and people who die with COVID aren't necessary. It's not easy to separate those two.
Right.
It's not easy to identify that was the actual cause, or is this a contributing factor? And so that's every number in that 220,000 people who died, at least with COVID. Whether that was the primary cause or not is TBD.
Right.
So,
it will never be determined, honestly.
No, there's no way to find out.
And so there's a couple more COVID things I want to mention, but before we get off on the debate, get off of the debate, I wanted to talk about just in the end. Biden was talking about the oil. Did you hear about his thing on oil and hear how Trump capitalized on that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think right at the very end of the debate, right?
Yeah. So Biden's like, yeah, we're gonna phase out. We're gonna. He never, he said specifically, I'm not gonna end fracking, but we're going to phase out the oil industry. Ultimately the oil industry will be no more. And from a kind of a left-wing perspective, an ecological perspective, there is a sense in which, eventually you'll have to transcend oil, right? You're going to have to do something that's not oil because there will be no more oil. But I think that, Trump made hay with that because people don't, that's not something people are ready for anytime within the next 30, 50 years,
Yeah, and still the number of jobs. I know there's been some debate about the number of people directly connected to it, but when you look from people in the industry versus the trucking, which is still obviously very huge, transportation. I know there's some electric vehicles now, but by and large, upper 90s percentage of the trucks that are on the road are powered by gas. Gas station attendants and various other things related to gas stations in this country.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
it is a significant number of jobs. And to be honest, it just feels like it was getting late in the debate for Joe, that he really, the timing of that whole issue, the way it came up so late in the game, it felt like maybe something he just wasn't quite prepared for, and he let that slip. I know Trump was kind of hammering on it all night that he wants to end fracking. I know Pence and Harris in their debate, Pence was really hard on it. So something that they're going after, they're really trying to argue that.
Because they want Pennsylvania. They want
right?
Pennsylvania.
So that's what I was going to say. All these states that are on the fence here, potential swing states, a lot of these activities are pretty strong there. And I think he does. Probably from an outsider's perspective, who's just coaching, if we're just coaching the candidates, I think Trump probably, his best line of the night was, you hear that, Pennsylvania? You hear what this guy's saying he wants to do to you?
Yeah.
He probably scored more points at the very end right then than he did most of the rest of the night.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Pennsylvania because we're both in Pennsylvania. The polls, predictably, are closing in, right? It used to be, an 8-point lead, and now it's not quite. Things are getting tighter. And I think that's just the nature of polls in this world that we live in. I think the polls are sort of used as a weapon. They're used as a morale booster. So we're going to see polls that are biased, at least. And then as the date gets closer, they're going to kind of inch a little bit to a lesser deficit, right? They're going to inch to, it's neck and neck. And by election day, they're going to say it's neck and neck. Because they don't want to sound like idiots by the end of it. They don't want to say, we were predicting that it was, a 30-point race.
Right.
And then he wins. So there's a great chance that he'll win. I believe that he could win. That is Trump. He could win. But yeah, Pennsylvania is going to be critical to that. And it's just an interesting state. You've got two major metropolitan areas and a couple of smaller ones. It's really probably the swing state, maybe that in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. I would, put at least in top three. And I would say too, we live in I would say a liberal part of the state, even though we're not in one of the main metro areas. But if you drive anywhere outside, the primary city center, it's actually it's a true rarity to see support for Biden. It's really you'll drive long distances without seeing a Biden sign, and I think this is not unlike most of the other parts of what is considered to be flyover America. When you look at the electoral map on election night, basically from the extreme West Coast until maybe you get up to Minnesota and Illinois, those are all red states over there. And the more rural you tend to be, the more red it is. And the thing I always wonder about this is, they talk about voter suppression and getting out the vote, and especially in the urban communities where that isn't always a priority. And I know there's been a great amount of effort put into getting those people to vote over the last 2 decades, especially. And I know there was significant turnout from urban centers for Obama, being the first African-American president. Obviously that's going to turn people out. Does Joe Biden excite you? I mean, even if you're, politically on the left, is his campaign exciting, or is it an anti-Trump campaign?
Oh, it's gotta be. It's gotta be. People are voting against Trump.
Yeah.
And maybe, for your far leftists, they might be voting for Kamala Harris. That's possible. But I can't see anyone that says. I actually got a call yesterday. A guy was doing telephone, I don't know what you'd call it, but he was basically trying to convince me to vote for Joe Biden. And he was trying to say how Joe Biden is just kind of the guy. And I will say, there is something to Joe Biden that's not scary, right? So with Hillary Clinton, all the conservatives were like super scared. She's going to take away our guns. She's going to let you marry a dog, whatever it is that she's going to do. And people were scared that on social issues and on economic issues, she was going to be just off the rails. And Joe Biden's not really scary in that way. I don't think, despite the fact that Trump is trying to tell you that he's going to take away the guns, no one's really afraid of that. I don't think. And I think that's going to be a problem for Trump because Hillary Clinton was the perfect person to run against for him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that there's no one that's like, oh yes, Joe Biden is the guy. He's going to be the one that's really going to, but he might be the one to make things be less crazy, and that might be enough for him.
Mm-hmm. And I think most commentators have said all along that the biggest thing that Trump needs to do is kind of just get out of his own way. That he actually has greater potential to harm himself than actually boost his campaign, because he kind of has. I don't know if anyone's seen any Trump paraphernalia, but there's a Sylvester Stallone body with Trump's head on it. There's Trump as the face of the eagle. There's a lot of really pretty poorly done Photoshop work with Trump. There's a lot of love for someone who really couldn't be farther from most of these people's lives. Trump, he's from Queens, as he mentioned in his debate with Joe Biden, where he came from. There's, he grew up in a, relatively, hardworking, but, obviously not a blue collar family. And, he's one of the wealthiest, 100 people in the country. He's not really barbecue, country music, and shotgun kind of guy,
right?
And yet these are the people who love him, and so he has done very little other than talk the kind of talk that he has to attract those people to his campaign. So essentially, he has a good majority of his base in the bag just by existing, but he can talk himself into a lot of trouble. He can hurt himself by saying too much, and that seems to be the thing that has hurt him the last several months. Is talking a little bit more than what he needs to, because that first debate he should have just let Biden talk the way he did in the second debate. The more Biden talks, the more he hurts himself, because he's getting up there, I think, and he's not as sharp as he was a decade ago. And what was Trump doing? He was trying to talk over him, and in the process, he looked really rough. He looked mean. He didn't let Biden talk himself into trouble, but Trump in the process actually talked himself into trouble, saying too much and then possibly contradicting himself a few times in that debate. So this past debate, he seemed to be more reserved. He seemed to, I don't know whether he was contractually obligated at this point, whether there was a mute button on his microphone, we don't know, but he really seemed to be much more quiet and calm, a demeanor that no one has really seen from him. And I think it really worked to his advantage to just stay out of his own way.
Yeah, and I think Trump was, Trump, as you've heard from the 60-minute interview, like Trump has his own opinions about the people that he's dealing with, and I don't think he was particularly happy with what's his face, Chris Wallace. And he explicitly said that he was fine with this lady that was doing the moderating. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was helpful. The moderator, and I also
made a big difference.
Yeah, and I thought she was I thought she interrupted him more than her, but he probably was talking more than I said him than her, him than Trump than Biden. But I think that also he was probably talking more than Biden was as well. So you never really know. But overall, I think he was happy with the debate, and that is what it is. I think Biden, as his strategy has been, does, like you said, does the best when he's not talking so much. And
yeah, just hide in the basement, say as little as possible, talk as little as possible, and hope that Trump kind of shoots himself in the foot. But Trump kind of going on the warpath. I imagine over these next a week and a day at this point until election night, I imagine we're going to see a lot more of Trump than Biden for that very purpose. But when you have the momentum like Trump does now, it behooves him to stay active and out there and kind of close that gap. And I imagine that's what we'll see over the next week. We'll probably get this confirmation. That's going to be fuel for his fire on his stump speeches over the next week. Oh yeah, for sure. And Biden doesn't have any real momentum to use to his own advantage at this point. And so it's going to be really hard for him to keep up in that regard.
Yeah. So that's the debate. We could transfer over to something else. Just if you're in the room, please hit like. It's a big help to us. I want to just say that again. I want to just also talk about. We talked briefly about COVID. I want to talk a little bit about COVID. A little bit about what's it called? Some election stuff. And then finally, do you want to talk about this Hunter Biden stuff, or do you want to just forget about that?
Well, we could, or it'll be pre-election night, and who knows what will come up in the next week. But there might be something that we could put off until next week, and that might be something that we could put off till then.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think just if we just want to briefly talk about the Hunter Biden, I think that it's not enough. Whatever they were hoping to gain from it, it's not working. And I've heard that the pictures are out there. I've heard that you can see some pretty ridiculous things from that laptop. But it's just not connecting. It's not connecting to Biden. It's not connecting to the voters. And so as it pertains to election, I just don't see it. I don't see it as being significant.
Yeah, I think voters can realistically say, yeah, but we're not voting for Hunter. And I don't think that that's a cop-out. I think you can be a Republican Trump lover and say, yeah, that's true. He's kind of a screw-up, but that's not who I'm voting for to be president. Look at Joe's life. He doesn't really seem to have, some of those same problems. Maybe next week, if we talk a little bit more about Hunter, whether it's in the news or not, maybe it would be something worth talking about fathers and sons and relationships there, and what is the responsibility of the father, because anyone knows a lot of what seem to be morally upstanding fathers who have bad sons. We talked about it in the presidential regards, and the way that they raise their families, and being a good leader or a good king doesn't mean that you're necessarily a good father. And so maybe we can talk about that more another time, but yeah, I don't think this is going to work for most Americans. They can say, yeah, right, he's screwed up, and there's something wrong with him. But Joe appears to be a loving dad who forgives his son even when he screws up, and he's not responsible for his son's own decisions. His son's an adult.
Right, and it's true that if we're going by what we were saying last week or earlier, there's just people don't care about Joe Biden. like they're voting against Trump, and so whatever Joe Biden does, it doesn't really particularly matter.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't personally care. As someone who's interested in the political aspect of this, it does feel like something that you bring up at this stage in the debate, kind of as a gotcha. I think no one should be surprised to know that one of the architects of this, someone who got a hold of this video, is Steve Bannon, Trump's first campaign manager, campaign advisor, at least at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And someone who's definitely been around these circles a lot and knows how to play these kind of I don't know ways, sleazy politics, the worst side of politics. And so the fact that this is all coming up now is not terribly surprising, but for me it doesn't move the meter at all.
Right. And it's not gonna do anything. So okay, so let's do let's do a little bit of COVID. There is one video that I think really sums up. If we clip it out, if we watch the whole thing over a period of time, I think that will be helpful because it's the most recent. So what how YouTube has this COVID-19 section where you scroll down a couple of videos and you just get a whole row of COVID-19. This is from ABC. And it came out today. It was like a couple hours ago, and I think this whole video is just perfect for how they're talking about COVID, how they're scaring everybody, and how they're connecting it to Trump. So let's just listen to this piece by piece, and we can talk about it as it goes.
And the U.S. has passed a grim new milestone in the pandemic. More than 225,000 Americans have now lost their lives as new cases surge across the country. El Paso, Texas is now using overflow tents to house patients as hospitals there run out of beds. And officials there have even put a curfew in place in hopes of slowing the spread.
All right, so real quick, I'm watching the video, but you are all obviously just listening. They're talking about overflow tents. And they have some B-roll of this overflow tent, and it's completely empty. There are no people in it.
This is like the ship. That they brought to New York City that treated 3 people, and they sent it back.
Right.
Sent
Yeah.
it back because it wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
Or the Javits Center.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you'll see later in the video they talk about potentially needing it later on or whatever, but. Let's be real. It hasn't gotten to that level, but that's always been the fear. It's always been like, but pretty soon these hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. So now we have to lock down, or we have to all wear masks, or we have to mandate masks. And mandating masks is going to be another thing that happens in this video. So let's keep rolling.
ABC's
Pro tip, ABC. Pro tip for you.
Yeah.
Show us roll of the outside of the tent and then show us the inside of an overloaded hospital, preferably from a World War II movie.
That's right.
Gonna know
it's all in black and white.
In black
That's
and
right.
white, World War II hospital, field hospital. Show us an outside of the tent and let people, put 2 and 2 together there. Don't show us the inside of an empty tent.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go.
Marcus Moore has the latest.
This morning, the U.S. crossing yet another dark milestone. More than
from the dark winter.
225,000 lives lost as cases are still on the rise in about 80% of states, hitting the young like 25-year-old Bethany Walters.
So what's been the toughest part of all of this? Breathing?
She said breathing.
And the elderly. Now, a study from the University of Washington estimates if 95% of the population wears a mask, it could save nearly 130,000 lives before February.
Okay, so I want to talk about that. So the Worldometer, how they've got their stats. They also have their projections. And have you played around with those projections on Worldometer at all?
Yes, it's a very fun game that I play usually every week.
It's ridiculous. Go onto Worldometer and find those projections for the U.S. and like they have these three possibilities, right? They have like this is what we think will happen, this is what will happen if 95% of people wear masks, and this is what will happen if we relax mask wearing. And the one where you relax mask wearing, it's like 5,000 people die a day. not a day, but like a week. It's like 3,000 or 4,000 a week, and it's just crazy. Like that's not happening. So this video is purporting that if everyone wears masks, nearly 130,000 people could be still alive that wouldn't be alive by February.
Seems legit.
Yes, yeah, legit.
Dr. Anthony Fauci with a blunt assessment.
If people are not wearing masks, then maybe we should be mandating it.
Oh yeah, he's getting a little bolder too. Anthony Fauci, he's going in.
He's been on the outs though, so he's kind of been relegated a little bit. They've been talking crap about Dr. Fauci, and so he's got to get back in there. He's losing viewers.
That's right. So he goes on. I don't know where he was on that, but he's saying, yeah, let's mandate it. And you know what? When the administration, or if the administration changes, that's very possible that you'll see a federal mandate for masks. But until then, we still live in Pennsylvania, where there is a state mandate for masks. So, but yeah, like I said, this video has everything. Also, if you're in the room, please hit like. We appreciate it. Here's the rest of the video.
Here in El Paso, COVID-related hospitalizations are up 300% in the last 3 weeks, spiking from 259 to 786. The mayor urging people to stay home as much as possible for the next 2 weeks.
Between the positives, to the hospitalizations, how many days it takes, to the ICU, to the ventilators, to, we hope, not deaths, but the bottom line is we think by next Wednesday we're going to need another 200 plus hospital rooms.
Data from the COVID tracking project shows that nationwide, in cases where race is known, black people are dying at nearly 2.5 times the rate of white people.
How do they how do they do that? Like, I'm not saying it's not true. Those stats could be true, but how do they make COVID-19 racist?
Are you asking how a mainstream media news organization that is owned by Disney and has, of the 3 major networks, is having the most trouble right now, would not try to use a race war as a possibility to draw attention to their story?
I guess I was asking that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't see. It may be true. I don't know exactly.
Well, I guess what is to be done about this? I think there's a reason. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, I'm sure, and I know there's been a few articles written about some of them. But one of the reasons I know that these people tend to be dying is because hospitals in the areas where various racial minorities live are not capable. They don't draw the best doctors. They don't draw the best nurses. They don't draw the best staff. They don't have as good of services or equipment. And if anyone would get into why they don't draw the best doctors and why they don't have the best staff and why they don't have the best equipment, the secret has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with money. And
right.
Why do doctors not want to work in poorly run, potentially in almost perennially failing hospitals? Has anyone ever asked that question?
Right.
No, and we'll never get to that point, of course. So we can't actually look at any stats or facts that underlie a stat about a number of deaths and ask why. What these journalists, is anyone asking why about any of this stuff? No, just let's use the base stats to incite race and bring that into the conversation.
Yeah, I wonder about the same thing with school districts, right? People are saying these school districts are no good. Why are they no good? Well, because they don't pay as well as others, and the teachers aren't as good. But yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on there. But let's keep going with this.
Making up 21% of fatalities, despite accounting for just over 12.5% of the population. This morning, we're getting a closer look at those who have passed away from the virus since the start of the pandemic. While less than 1% of America's population live in long-term facilities like nursing homes, they make up 41% of COVID-19 deaths.
That's a significant stat. Less than 1% of the population make up for 41% of the COVID-19 deaths. That's like the the 2% of people making money make up however many percent of.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is almost on par with that,
Right.
And that's another question, why is it in particular that nursing homes are so negatively affected by COVID? And is there anyone who's gone on television to explain the virus enough to explain why that population is most adversely affected by it, and maybe some policies that could be put in place other than, no one can visit their loved ones in a nursing home. Maybe there's more to it than that. It seems like the nursing homes have been shut down, at least here in Pennsylvania, since early April. Right. Basically, no one in, no one out, and yet these people are still dying. Well, who is taking that into the nursing home? How's it getting in there if the regular general public, who aren't allowed to visit, aren't bringing it in? It's got to be the staff, right? Or the equipment or something else. Well, why hasn't there been an investigation into why that isn't more particularly watched? Again, the lockdown mentality hasn't really benefited nursing home residents at all. All this time no one's been able to visit, and yet what good has it really done them?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. There's one more thing that I wanted to pull from this clip. Let me just keep running.
The hospitals here in this city have actually run out of beds. It is the reason why they are.
Oh, that's another thing about the running out of beds. For most of these situations, they're not actually running out of beds. They're running out of beds that have been designated for COVID-19.
Right.
So, these hospital wards say, okay, we have a COVID ward, and that COVID ward has, let's just say, 10 rooms, 20 beds, or whatever. And then once that COVID ward is full, they just bleed over into ICU or into general care or whatever. And these people still have a place to, they're not getting turned away from the hospital.
Yeah, and the same, back in the beginning when they would say, oh, the beds are at 80% capacity. The capacity of the hospital could go up or down depending on how many they wanted to do. So they, again, in the preparations for COVID, they didn't know how many to set aside. So if a hospital set aside, 50 beds, and 40 of them were filled, and you'd hear stories from your local news saying that the hospitals are 80% capacity, but that's of the COVID beds, the ones that were set aside for it, and they had no idea how many to expect for that. It didn't mean that the hospital was 80% full, that only there would be such limited amount of space for you to get in if you ever needed to go to hospital for anything. It was essentially scaring people away from hospitals for normal hospital activities that you would go to the ER for, particular surgeries, cancer treatments. This was all scaring these people away over a figure that's made up almost at random in the beginning because, of course, no one had any idea what to predict about the number of beds to put out there. So, a lot of these numbers, if you look deep down underneath of them, they're just used for whatever side you really want to promote politically. If you want to scare people and say things are really bad and crazy, talk about the number of beds and running out of beds. But, let us look inside the tent and see how many beds are full. None of them were full. So what's the tent there for? It's a potential tent at this point.
Yeah, the potential tent. There is, I just got a link from the chat about the black people dying from COVID. And this is from The Guardian. And it seems that there is some correlation between race and your susceptibility.
So your DNA.
Right. Some people just get hit by it harder. And I can forward this link to you and you could read it, but obviously we can't read it right now. So let's see. That's basically the end. So he brings the other guy in. Let's talk about this. This guy talks, some doctor from wherever.
Morning.
Good morning, Diane.
The U.S. is just set the highest 7-day case average yesterday. Can you explain why that number is so important?
Yeah, I mean, so we're at our highest 7-day average. We also had the single highest case count, over 80,000 new cases, and that's an increase of 32% over the last 2 weeks. We're seeing this massive rise. It's not just in one part of the country, it's across the entire country, especially in the Midwest and in El Paso, like you covered. And it's not.
This doctor, by the way, has what looks to be an Anthony Fauci pillow on his couch. I'm not kidding. I'm gonna screenshot this.
Yeah, okay. I just now can see the video, and yes, that is definitely what's there. He has a pillow. Ostensibly, he will take a nap with his head
on Anthony
Fauci's head.
Oh man, can I link this somehow? I'm gonna link this on this chat because it's important that people see.
Take a screenshot.
Control V.
This needs to be the episode photo.
Yeah. So if you go to let's see, where are we? About 3 minutes into this video, you're gonna see the Anthony Fauci pillow. Very important that everyone knows that. So anyway, really, this guy goes on and he talks about how it's just every single day you go on YouTube or you go on the news, and somehow they construe it that every day is worse than the last. Even in like a month ago when things were actually going down, every day. So if it's not deaths, it's cases. If it's not cases, it's people in nursing homes that have it. If it's not that, it's whatever. They just find a way to make it worse every single day. And I don't know how people are consistently, like how the fear mongering works consistently. Don't people get numb to this?
You would think, but here's another thing. I mean, like you said, in PA, I know in New York State, it's the same. It's actually pretty hard to go anywhere without a mask. Seems like every single store, everyone has a sign, no mask, no service. Some people I know have been excoriated or escorted out by police for not wearing masks into a store where there was a sign. So everyone's, doing this, and yet every solution from Fauci to this doctor with the Fauci pillow, everyone's saying the same thing. Well, we just need to wear masks. The coronavirus is surging, because people aren't wearing masks. Where is it that people aren't wearing masks? Is it the South? Are people not wearing masks in the South? Do you know?
I know that there are places. I mean, even if you think about the more rural areas of PA, like I know where my wife is from, they just don't wear them, and that's kind of, I don't know. This is what they do.
But is that where all the cases are coming from too? Like, are they finding in particular that the reason that cases are high are because people aren't wearing masks in those areas? In fact, are we finding that are there states where masks are not mandated, and that's where all the cases are coming from? Or are the cases coming from places where we know that they are, like New York, and like New York City and New York State and other places in California? Where are the cases coming from? And are we able to actually tie direct causation to the fact that there's not a mask mandate to the reason that cases are? I don't think we can. In fact, New York found out very early on in June. There's a video, actually, we should try to find that video and put that here for people to see. Cuomo saying, we made everyone stay home, and they're still getting COVID.
Yeah,
they're still passing it on to each other, and they're just staying home, people in their own houses. So the fact that you're not wearing a mask in your own house became a problem at that point too. So I would like to see more actual research done that shows that the reason the cases are surging are specifically because people aren't wearing masks, and not because of the fact that it's a virus of which a mask is not particularly effective, and that it's really impossible for people to wash their hands all day, every day, wear a mask at every moment in time, not touch their face, not do any of the other things where it's possible to transfer what appears to be a pretty easy to transfer virus. I would like to see a little bit more research done. So journalists, can you get on that maybe?
Yeah, and there's also the stats that have to do with the masks. And I've always found that kind of strange. Like, if the masks work, then why aren't they kind of like homogenized? Like, why aren't we told wear this mask? Like, can't throw anything over your face. Like, throw a piece of ham over your face and that'll be fine. And then like the fact that some of them aren't even masks, it's just like face shields. So like little like spit particles won't get on you, but you're still breathing the air. So yeah, like I mean, I think I heard today that the just the regular like cloth masks that you might make with a sewing machine, like your lady at your church might make, they're like they help you like by 10%. You get a 10% improvement, all the way up to the highest M95s or whatever they're called. They get you up to like 90%. But all in all, it's just it's not a guarantee, and people they're not even instructed or trained on how to best even use the mask. They were saying early on that the masks might even make it worse. In fact, Fauci said this, right? Because you're going to play with your face, you're going to touch your mask, you're going to touch your eyes, touch your face, and it's going to make it worse. So I don't know. It's all down to whether you want more of this kind of thing or less, and that's what the election's going to tell us, whether we get more or less of this.
And I think this may be a little reductionistic. And again, I'm not a huge fan of either of these two candidates, but I will say that this election does seem to come down to you are voting whether or not you would like to be locked up for the foreseeable future, or you'd like to return to life as normal as best as you can, whether that includes possibly getting COVID or passing it on to someone you love. You're voting for your own literal ability to leave your house and do things that you want to do. And that is really the biggest issue probably facing voters this election. And it's weird because it only just came about since March. And really after that, because then everyone was kind of playing a game where we're all on the same team and we're all in this together, and really no one was. But all the other issues really came down to that. Mm-hmm. I just find that fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly is. And there's one little thing. You've probably heard this report from NPR where they actually admitted something that's interesting. Let me find it. Is this it? I think this is the clip.
Now for some good news about coronavirus treatment. 2 studies soon to be published show that hospitalized patients in the US and UK are much less likely to die from the virus than they were at the start of the pandemic.
And there's reasons for that, right? There's people that say that it's mutated, so it's more contagious, less deadly, and they're saying that our therapeutics are better. We understand how to treat it, and there are people who say the people who are who are going to die from it just died from it, and now we're left with people who aren't going to die from it. Any of these are possibilities, but I think that's what we need to be hearing more of. Like, it's not going to be as bad as it was, and that's kind of where we are.
That's right. And in fact, again, Worldometer is having a lot of data on there. The projections, of course, which we love to just screw around with, and may or may not mean anything. But the stats that are on there are pretty interesting, because if you go to Worldometer and you look at the U.S., for the U.S., we have there's a little section when you scroll down and talk to you about the number of cases that are active and closed. And, closed means either you've been discharged or you've died. And then they show the active cases and the stats on those. But for the active cases, they actually consider only about 1% of those to be serious or critical, and 99% to be mild. And if you know anyone who's had the coronavirus, I would say probably your experience will ring true in this as well, which is those people who got it or tested positive were just told likely to quarantine at home with no medication. And even if they experienced bad, severe flu-like symptoms or something like that, they were not hospitalized. They were not asked to go into the hospital. They weren't really probably given a medication other than told to take zinc, vitamin C or D, zithromycin, I think is the Z-Pack that you take sometimes when you get a bad flu. That's about it. If you were even prescribed to do anything, otherwise it was just rest, drink fluids, and stay home. And this number, that 99 to 1%, is way different than it was early on. It was in that 78-80% range for a long time. Early in Worldometer tracking, back in April and May, the number of cases that were considered severe was way, way higher. And now it's just such a tiny fraction. Also, here's a good number for you to see, is that you can tell that the number of people who've had it, been discharged, died, right now is sitting in that under 3%. And of course, we know that these numbers aren't all telling us for sure that everyone who has died as a coronavirus statistic on Worldometer doesn't mean that they died from it. So this is actually pretty helpful data. It's good to hear, like you said, some news that actually people aren't really dying nearly as much as what it was thought that they would in the beginning, or even that they actually were dying the way they were dying in the beginning. You can just tell that by looking at the graphs too.
Yeah. It's one of those things that there are people who suspect that after the election we're going to see a change in the reporting. If it's Biden, it's going to go away. If it's Trump, maybe they'll find a different tactic. They'll find a different route. Many people believe after the election it's going to subside. I don't know, but it's a good guess. So we're at the about hour and 10 mark. So there's plenty more to talk about, but I think that's a pretty good place to stop. I think by next Monday, we're going to be on the eve of the election. So we'll try to focus in on the election next time we get together. And in the meantime, if anyone's watching this, or if anyone is watching this after it's live, please give us some input. Give us ways that we can improve the podcast, ways that we give us links of things to read, things that we can incorporate into the next show. And we want to make it better, so we like your feedback. Is there anything that you have to add, Micah?
No, I just want to concur. Please tell us that we suck, but also tell us how we suck.
Yeah, how we can suck less. Exactly.
Because it's important to know that we suck, but can we do that a little less? That's more important.
Yes, and of course, check out our website. We just got a website put up again. We had one, and now we have one again. It's 60secondphilosophy.com. That has all of our YouTube videos, a blog for when we decide to write some stuff, and it has all the links to the podcast, which, if all goes well, by next week will be up on your major podcasting networks. So we're excited about that, and we're hoping...
We're coming for you, Rogan.
That's right. Yeah, pretty soon we'll be able to get that Spotify original.
Give me that 10 mil.
So that's it for today. Thanks for everyone who is in the room. Thanks for everyone who liked, and thanks for everyone who's watching here after it's live. And we will catch you next time.
Peace out, y'all.
Bye-bye. All right, that's stream.